It's Tuesday night, CNM, you're here. I think we're going into the bread business. I think we have enough bread to feed an army over there. So since the army has arrived, please go ahead and sample some of the wonderful bread that Panera provides for us here. We were trying to figure out why so much bread. Maybe it's because of all the snow, or they have a slow week or something like that. So feel free to help yourself. So we have food for the stomach and food for the mind and soul tonight. So
preach it now.
Edie is rubbing off on me. That's the next thing you know, I'm going to be doing holier than thou stuff. You better look out. And for a Jew, that would be a really weird thing, I'll tell you. All right. So on that note, now that you all know my background, let me pass the mic over to Edie to start us in prayer.
Shall we stand to honor God? Oh, merciful God, our Father, we thank you, we praise you, and we bless you. You are the only person who, through all this stuff we've been going through, is as good as your promise. People promise us stuff and they can't deliver. Job things come along and we think we're going to get them, but all of a sudden they decide to go with somebody else. But you are true. You are honest. You are pure. You are lovely. How lovely is thy dwelling place, O Lord of hosts. We really thank you for being here tonight. Every one of us has hearts open, minds open, prepared for what you are about to do, because there's going to be a miracle to happen here tonight. Something is going to be said. Something is going to be seen. Something is going to happen here tonight that will affect our lives from here on. And we're looking for it. We're expecting a blessing. We're expecting our miracle. We have our eyes and our arms, our hands open for this miracle. We're just looking for it. We thank you for the people you have brought here to serve us. All the tables, all the resources, all the seminars, and the person you're bringing before us tonight, the servant that you have sent to speak to us. We thank you before we even see it happen, because we know this is what your will is for us for this night. We just want to thank you in advance. We love you. We honor you. We praise your name. In our Savior's blessed name. Amen.
Amen.
You can see why we have Edie do this. She'd do a much better job than I would do. So, all right, let's see. We have Francine. Would you like to come up and give us our announcement on what's going on in the world?
Okay.
Good evening. My name is Francine Tolson.
I'm Ellen Noring.
And Ellen Noring. And for the last several years, I have led the library team. And for those of you who may not have known, but it used to be over there. Yeah. And we are making an announcement about it. Dave? Okay. Okay, it's coming. So we have found that there's been very low usage of the library. And there's a lot of effort that goes into it with the team, the volunteers for this. So we are morphing the library. We are shutting it down as a physical library. We're transitioning it to a virtual library. And Ellen, who has been a volunteer for several years, is taking over as the new leader of the library team. Next slide. Okay. So why are we ending it? Well, if you think about it, CNM's real value is in the workshops and in the resource tables here. And when people come here, that's what they come here to attend. It's the same time as the library is operational. So people come pouring out of the workshops, and they're finished with their tables, and the volunteer is shutting down the library because it has to be packed up and ready to go at 8 o'clock so the main program can happen. So we found only about 3 or so checkouts per night, which is really not very much when you consider that the library had 80 to 100 books. So, next slide, please. So, Ellen's going to talk about the future of the library.
One of the things we found was that the limited length of time that we requested people to take books out was a problem. And in shutting down the library, we wanted to make a resource available to the people who come here to give them the same kind of information that they can take to their own libraries or find books on their own. So we are going to be creating a virtual library. We'll start with the bibliography of the books that we have and annotate that so there will be information about the books. We'll make that available to the people who come to the Career Network Ministry on the meetup, and we're hoping to get it into the folders that go out to the new members. So right from the beginning, you'll have that resource. And we think that that is going to be a great substitute, but because we did find that people use the library only because they were waiting for something else. Or the people who were most interested were the newcomers who didn't really know what else to do, and the library table was right there. So we want to use our time and resources in a way that's going to give more value. So the virtual library we thought was a good idea.
So the launch date of that is TBD, probably in a few weeks. And there'll be a new library email address. So if you have books that you have recommended, that you can recommend because you found them useful, please let the library know, and they will include them on the list.
The new CNM library email is right on the screen here, so you can take that down and use that. So if you've already got ideas or suggestions to make, please send that along. And after a few weeks, we'll start to launch the new bibliography that we'll provide, and then it will be on an ongoing basis, living, breathing document. So because of that, we'll still need volunteers.
Right, so what's next? We're going to have a book giveaway night next Tuesday night. We'll have books, and we ask that you only take one, but we're going to give away not only the inventory that we currently have, but some books that have been donated that other people found useful but never made it into the inventory because they weren't quite as up to date, or they were such a narrow subject matter like technical books that it didn't make sense to put them in the library.
If all the books aren't given away next week, we'll hold it over for one other week, and then after that, books that have not been given away will go to the library, the public library.
Okay, next slide. So I wanted to be, as we transition the library, I wanted to give thanks to thank the CNM leadership who've been very supportive of the library all this time. In fact, their arms had to be twisted to shut it down because they were so attached to it. But we made our case, and they saw the wisdom of transitioning the library to a virtual library. I also want to thank all of you who have patronized the library and used it. We thank you, and we hope you will stay involved by recommending books that will be put on the list. Also, our volunteers, Ellen being one of them, the rest of them aren't here, but when they come, they devote an entire evening to doing the library, plus then they take the list home to update it and send it on. So it's at least one evening and a couple hours every time they serve. So it's not, it hasn't been a light load for them. And also all the book donors who have given books to the library, some of which made it in the inventory and some of which you may see again in the giveaway nights upcoming. Next slide. And that's it. So we thank you and look for the virtual library.
Thank you both, Francine and Ellen. The library team has been amazing. If you to watch them lug all the books in, put them out, lug all the books back, and keep up with our inventory. It really has been quite a sizable workload actually for them. So so those of you that are coming in and new, that are queuing up for the orientation table, guess what? You're going to have to talk to people that are standing in line for the orientation table. You can't pick up a book and bury your head in the book and not network with each other. So, all right, before we introduce our speakers, just because I always think it's so fun to celebrate a little bit of success as we go forward. Those of you that have had an in-person interview over this past week, would you please stand up and keep standing? We'll give you a round of applause. People that have had an in-person interview, please stand up. Great. And applause for holding the microphone. Okay, keep standing. How about phone interviews? Anybody with phone interviews? Okay, sorry, Bill. Do you want to watch me? Okay. Great. How about anybody who has added someone to their network that's going to help them with their job search, either through LinkedIn or through conferences? Stand up and we'll give you a round of applause. That should be everybody. That's right. Who said that? That's exactly right. The rest of you that are sitting down, get to work. Okay. Last group that we always want to acknowledge, because we always think it can be a little intimidating, especially we've grown so much. We had how many breakout sessions? We like almost took over the main room in the church here. We've got so much stuff going on. Those of you that are here for the very first time, and we know you by that red border around your name tag, would you please stand up and let's welcome you for being so brave to show up tonight. Just don't come back, that's right, okay. All right, so let me introduce our speakers. We have Dr. Joe Golden and Tracy Holinka. Dr. Joe, raise your hand. Tracy, raise your hand. Hi. You figured that out by a process of elimination, who was who, right? Okay. They co-founded Chaos to Clarity, and I tell you what, in the world you're in right now, when you're trying to figure out what your next job search is, what a great title of your company that alone fits our group. More than a decade ago, and they've been providing web and content solutions to small businesses ever since. As a web and content strategist and brand storyteller, I love this. I think these are superwomen. Joe's superpowers include amplifying client voices on the web, educating without technobabble. How many of you do technobabble in your job interviews? Stop, right? And chaos-piercing vision. Ooh, my goodness, I'm gonna have to watch what I'm wearing here. Okay. Tracy is a web developer and WordPress expert who creates WordPress websites that tell better brand stories, digital clarity, and making life with the web easier are just some of her superpowers. So I asked them why they don't have their costumes on tonight, but they decided just to wear their civilian clothes because they sound like they are superwomen, so the floor is yours.
It's incredible.
Thanks so much. Well, we're really happy to be here with you all tonight, and I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick questions before I say a couple of other things about us. First of all, how many of you in this room have a presence on the web? You're on LinkedIn, you're somewhere, you're doing something. Excellent, we have stuff for you. How many of you think of yourselves as storytellers? Okay, there will be more hands up by the end of tonight. This is good, we have stuff for you too. So one of the things that I think is incredible about being a human, and I know this sounds hokey and weird, but I think it is amazing that we can communicate the way that we can. And the fact that we can talk to each other and have emotional connections and tell stories and really get things done in the world is absolutely amazing. So Tracy and I met when we were in graduate school, and we did a lot of things together. We provoked a lot of thought. We raised some cane. We did this and that and ran some conferences and realized that we loved working together. And not to get all Jerry Maguire on you, but it is great when you find somebody whose other half of their skills really completes your work. So I'm not going to go all the way to you complete me, but Tracy helps me look really good on the web and helps me do what I do, and I help her do what she does. So we are both here to help you all get on with what you're trying to do. So that is a little bit about our story. Now, stories really matter, okay? And stories matter because our brains store memory as stories. They make culture possible. And my favorite thing is that they bridge reason, meaning, explanation, and emotion. So if you find that you're always explaining stuff, it is a great cue to stop and listen and think if you could tell a story instead. Because really, explaining eventually gets boring. And you don't want to get boring. So that's really important.
When you have an audience, stories help you create connection. So if you want to communicate the essence of something, a feeling, a place, how awesome you are in a job interview, a great love or a deep loss, all of these things that are so important to us as humans, the way to do that is through stories. And so one of the things that we all have to do now with the web and with the world as it is we have to think about how we're going to communicate our own brand, because you have a brand. It includes what people say about you. It includes what you think you're doing, the professional and personal promises that you make. And together, a brand is a collaborative thing that you have. So it's important to pay attention to that. And to remember that you are not in control of your brand as much as you want to be. Just ask Tylenol or Southwest, who left people on the runways, or anybody else who's made some major mistake, or other industry who realized that, you know what, their reputation and their brand in this world is not all about them. They are not in control. But what you are in control of, and this is really important, you are in control of your brand story. So what you say about yourself as a person, as a professional, that's what you have control over. So your brand story is for an audience. It's for whoever you're talking to, and it lets you communicate more effectively. Whether you're a business owner, a solopreneur, a consultant, a job seeker, it really doesn't matter. It's the same. So this is our picture of your great big brand story, and so this little creature will be coming back throughout the night, because I think it's nice to conceptualize your brand story as something that's a little bit off to the side of you. It's not who you are, but it's a way that you're presenting yourself. It's a way that you're talking about yourself and who you are as a person, your core values, the benefits you promise to employers, and really creating that sense that you have expertise that they can trust. And trust is hugely important in today's world. It's how we're making decisions about everything from soft drinks to buying cars to banking and, you know, where to move and where to live. Trust is really important. So no matter where you tell your story or who you tell it to or how you change it around for the intended audience, the heart of your brand story does not change. It's really about your core, and you can tell it in many different ways, but always there's that common piece. So on the web or in person, you're going to tell your great big brand story in a way that helps you connect with your audience, and that's some of what we're going to work on tonight. So in addition to your great big brand story, you have smaller stories, or you have other takes on your brand story that can help you talk about particular actions, or that you can use to reveal your beliefs or your expertise. And you're going to use smaller stories on the web to help create a sense of who you are and your bigger web story. One of the things that's really important to use when you're telling stories is metaphors, because metaphors help us understand things that, in terms of what we already know, and then make sense of something new. So when you walk into a job interview, you're new. People don't know you. But they might know if you're like a guide helping people get through the wilderness. That's one I use a lot, because believe me, on the web, people feel like they are lost in the wilderness and they're very frustrated. And so one of the things I do is guide them. One of the things that you might do, it could be anything. You could help them, you could care for them. I had a friend who recently just got a job as a nurse, and one of the pieces that's most important to her story is all of the pain and suffering she went through as she lost triplets in her first pregnancy, and then the joy that she has now that she has, 12-year-old twins, and the difference that that has made in her life. And that really helps her as a caring professional, and so she talks about it. But she doesn't dwell in the loss so much, but she does acknowledge it, because she meets so many people who are dealing with loss in the medical profession. Loss of their sense of self, their health, all of those things. And so just a little bit about her is enough to help put them at ease and really let her get going. So this is going to start our little exercise session. So if you all might want to have a piece of paper out tonight, because we're going to do several things very quickly.
Okay, so I want you all to choose, I have a very loud voice, one audience member, one audience that you're going to work with tonight, So it can be a potential employer. So you're going to tell a story, but you need to know who your audience is. And I'm sure you have many audiences, but you need to pick one for your work tonight. Otherwise, we'll never end this session. So it could be a potential employer. It could be a colleague. It could be a clients or customers, depending on what your situation is. It could be a potential business partners, or maybe you're going to focus on an audience, perhaps on social networking, maybe Twitter, LinkedIn. It could be, if you have a blog, it could be your blog readers. But we're going to focus on constructing your story, your brand story for this particular audience. So does anybody have any questions or need further explanation? Nope? Okay. So choose your one audience that you're going to focus on tonight.
Okay, so when you have your audience in mind, okay, great. When you have an audience and you're telling stories, you take on the role of a brand storyteller. And this is a little bit new to a lot of people, but it's really important to think of yourself as a storyteller and give yourself permission to really work on your story in the same way that professionals do who tell stories for a living. Because you can learn a lot from them. They have all the processes down, and you can take their processes and turn them in to meet your needs. And so that's one of the things that we want to work on tonight. So if you find your great big brand story and all the stories that support it, that speak to the essence of your brand, you'll be able to tell them in ways that bring out emotions and help you connect with different people. So never, ever, ever forget your audience. And I'm sure you know, is when you go into an interview or when you're meeting a lot of new people, it's really obvious when someone is thinking ahead and arguing in their head before they're talking or trying to figure out what to say and not listening. So you have to listen to your audience as a storyteller. So do keep that in mind. That's really important. This is one of my favorite triangles. We use a lot of different diagrams in our work, but to me, the brand, you as a brand storyteller are at the heart of this shape. You're at the heart of the story, the brand, and the audience, and you can do a lot with all of those things. So remember always that any story you tell about yourself tonight as you're telling stories, think that any story it's partial. It's necessarily partial. You cannot tell your whole life story. People spend many years writing autobiographies trying to even just tell a part of their story. So give yourself permission to just tell a piece. It's only a part of your bigger life story, and that is okay.
Could you go back to the triangle?
Sure.
That'd be wonderful.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you may have noticed that, well, you may not have noticed, but whatever. We use credentials. We're both social scientists. And one of the things that we do as social scientists, particularly ones who are very concerned with social change and with social justice, one of the things we talk about a lot is standpoint. Because the world looks very different depending where you're standing. And if you want to have a better understanding of other people, you have to be aware of your position. And I think everybody in this room is probably several steps ahead on this, because whenever you suffer a change in life circumstances, all of a sudden you start to realize that things look very different. And all the people that you were talking to before that you thought you had all this stuff in common with, and they're still seeing things in the way that works for them from their standpoint, and yours is all of a sudden radically different. And it could be in a good way, it could be in a challenging way, it doesn't matter, but where you stand really affects how you tell your story, and your brand story is no exception. So your standpoint depends on a number of things that we want to get you thinking about tonight. It depends on your identity, gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, ability, social class, all of these ways that people classify one another and that we move through the world. It depends on ways of knowing. I'm sure anybody in here plays sports. Ever? Even when you're a kid. If you play sports and you've ever done any kind of repetitive movement, you realize that you have physical memory. Your body remembers stuff. You know, it remembers how to drive. You start driving home, and all of a sudden you're there and you don't really pay attention to how you got there. That's because you have that physical memory. You have ways of knowing through your emotions, through your spirit. We know through language, and of course through our minds, through intellect. Our life experiences, adventures, triumphs, struggles, education, all of those things also give us different standpoints and ways to relate to one another or ways to separate ourselves from one another and stand out. We have shared beliefs, culture, religion, politics, all of these things, they exist and we come together around these beliefs because we have them in community. We have roles. You have roles at work, in your family, in the community, in this ministry perhaps. All of these different things are going to affect your standpoint. So I'd like you all to start thinking about your own standpoint a little bit.
Okay, so I want you to think about which element shaped the way you see yourself in the place in the workforce, because that's what you're really focused on here. So your identity, just basically all the things that Joe talked about. Your identity, your ways of knowing, how it affects your place in the workforce. Your shared beliefs, your religion, cultural beliefs, politics. So just take about 5 minutes and just think about that. You can write it down, you can just think about it if you want, whatever you're comfortable with. You can doodle it if that's what works for you.
You can also talk. If you would like to talk to other people, some people like to do this alone, some people like to do it in community. Up to you, either way. But you have 5 minutes. And then we're going to ring a bell. And do ask if you have any questions.
Yes.
Raise your hands. As you move past identifying the different influences on your standpoint, make sure that you start thinking about how those different things influence the way that you see yourself and your place in the workforce. Okay, so if you think about the way that you see yourself, if you think about the way that you you go over there. Sorry about that. You know, if you think about the way that you see yourself, and then you think about how these different parts of your standpoint influence the way that you see yourself, that's all we're doing is trying to figure out. So you're a woman. You're African American, you have experiences in the world, maybe you're a parent, maybe you have a particular level of education, have a particular religion, all of these things shape who you are. So how does that basket of things shape the way that you see yourself as a worker, as how you present yourself? Why does, or not why, but how does that help you understand who you are and what you can contribute? That's kind of where we're headed.
This is for a lot of us, I think, an abstract exercise.
Yeah.
Willing to do it. What helps in an abstract exercise is having an example. So I don't know, presumably you've done this for yourself. Can you share how, and since this is at a professional level, it seems like that you'd be willing to share that. If you could share how you have implemented this yourself before we do it ourselves, I think that would help.
Okay, Joe, I can do it. Okay, so for me, I'm a woman in IT, so that is like the #1 thing that affects me because it's a male-dominated world. So that's the first thing that I always bring to it. I'm a woman. I'm also white, so I know I have a certain amount of privilege because of that, and I come from a middle-class background. So that shapes who I am, and it also shapes how I approach, say, when I'm going to an interview or I'm dealing with a potential client. I have a master's, so that also shapes it too. And let's see. Those are some of the things. I mean, I have particular losses and struggles and triumph like everybody else. And so for me professionally, it's just fighting the male-dominated IT culture. The sexism, the harassment. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. So that shapes everything I do. And I have to understand that. I think one of the things with storytellers is they want to make sure they know who they are to tell the story, right? And that's part of what this exercise is.
And there is no right or wrong answer, and I know this is new, but the idea is that you just kind of muddle through it a little bit, and by the end of the things that we do, it will start coming more together. But I have to ask you to just trust us just a little bit with the process, and if you don't want to talk to anybody else about it, that's okay too.
I have to say, some of the things she comes up with, it may seem a little bit weird and uncomfortable, but, well, it's true. But it usually will get you where you need to be, and that's the most important thing. And so, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So doesn't the things that you say about where your standpoint is really depend upon the story you want to say? So if you're telling a particular story, doesn't certain things become more important in the way that you tell that story?
It becomes more important, some parts are, but it still doesn't, you are who you are. And your standpoint...
Yeah, I understand, but it seems like that there's, a multitude, there might be 100 different things to describe sort of who you are, but with respect to what you want to focus on for telling your message, for your standing point, there would be certain things that, my experiences as a father might be important for certain kind of stories. My experiences in my profession might be important for other kinds of stories, depending on the audience.
I think that's probably true.
Absolutely. I think that's really important, and one of the first ways you start to get your head around that is to figure out where you stand in all these different ways. And then you can draw on that. You can remember that and remember those pieces of yourself. Again, we're back to those pieces of the puzzle that every story is partial. It has to be. There, it's all these pieces, and so you got to recognize them in yourself. And sometimes it can be a learning moment. Other times it's just reinforcing what you're already very clear about and what you know. But yeah, it's the first step to helping you tell a better story in different situations, is knowing yourself. Yes, ma'am?
I think what she said about her standpoint, it's all about differentiation. It's about differentiation, because you're talking about a woman in IT.
Mm-hmm.
I can certainly relate to that, but I think that in an interviewing context, or like I'm looking at going after clients, knowing your standpoint helps you to differentiate yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Okay, good. Do you all need a little more time with this? One more question in the back, sorry.
Yeah, I have a question about something that you had said. Not only does it help you to differentiate yourself, but it helps the person listening differentiate. Is that what I heard you say?
Mm-hmm.
So wouldn't that mean that you'd want to draw out similar, like you'd want to draw them in with commonality as much as, or as much as you would want to differentiate yourself? I guess it would depend on the situation. But if you're trying to make a connection with an employer, you'd want to pull out those pieces of the story that would let you have commonality and yet differentiate yourself so that you could sell your uniqueness in the interview. Is that
I think that's true. I mean, when I talk to other women in IT or people who want to hire us to do a particular IT job, if they're a woman, we can actually commiserate about it. But I think that's true, yeah, because that's a commonality we have. So.
And one of the other pieces of this that story is so great about is that it's great that you all are on different sides of the room, because you have differentiation and you have connection. And those things exist at the same time. Story and being able to connect with other people, that's about both and. That's about two things at once. We use that in improv a lot. It's about both and. It's not about either or. Either or puts people into boxes and leaves them very stuck. And so as a storyteller, you don't want to be stuck in the either or box. You want to be in that both and place where multiple things can exist at once. That lets you shift gears and talk to your audience in different ways, or to make different choices in the moment so that you can communicate more effectively. Okay, so we've been talking about this a little bit, but the importance of knowing your standpoint is to have it inform your stories, just as you all were saying. But particularly, I think it helps you sometimes capture a moment in time because you can draw on those memories. You know, you think about actors who talk about method acting, and they try to put themselves into the role and really see themselves being there. And if you're aware of your standpoint and you're able to call on those parts of yourself that were so important at any given place or through any given set of your life experiences, you can be there, you can be authentic, and you can come back to it and use it when you're telling stories or when you're talking to people. And I want to stress the fact that stories reveal aspects of your life, but also stories are only as revealing as you want them to be. You really are in control of this, and there's so many things in this world we are completely not in control of. And those stories that we tell are a great point where we can actually take some control and shape them to get the message across that we want to get across. They also help us demonstrate beliefs and values. You know, the way that resumes have changed from being a list of responsibilities to being more about what you've done, you know, your results. What are you doing for your employers? I was just reading an article on a career site last night that was talking about that and how with the web and media, it's changed. So once there was a discussion about the one-page resume, even for an executive. I will never forget my father, you know, maybe 20 years ago, who was an SES something or other in the government, asking me to help him. He's an engineer, he doesn't write a lot, okay? But he was trying to ask me to help him to get his resume on one page. I looked at him and I'm like, you've had a very long, prestigious career. You're crazy. You don't try to put it on one page. You say what you have to say and be done with it. And so then in this article I was reading last night, it was talking about now with the web, people are getting more and more room because it's not just about, oh, now it can't go to 2 pages. Now it's more about, you know, in different industries, what you can really let people know that you can do for them. And you can't just put that in tiny little bullets. So when you think about telling your stories, that's like your chance to expand that resume and tell a little bit more. And give and demonstrate your beliefs and values and how you made a difference in your previous jobs. So I think that's important. So if we start with Brand Storytelling 101, you've got the idea that you're in control of your story and that you have to be yourself. So then you're going to need to take your great big brand story out for a walk. Okay? You need to test it out on people because this is all very odd. And I know it feels weird and it's going to feel uncomfortable for a while. But if you start testing it on someone you trust, you can see how it sounds. You can see how they respond to you. And as a storyteller, that's golden. That's going to give you information. That's going to help you shape what you want to say and see if you're actually connecting in the way you want to connect. So testing it is really important. And when you think about what goes into a brand story, not just the great big brand story, but all the other ones that support what you do and what you're about. Think about the core ideas, values, and beliefs that you want to communicate. Think about, that's for you. That's the personal part. That's what you want to get across. Think about the keywords that reinforce your brand. That's really important because people key in on keywords. So do search engines. We'll get to that, more of that later. Also think about the interesting characters that might come up in your stories, dramatic tension, the fact that you're promising to do something, to be a certain kind of person to help that other organization. And make sure you make it active. Passive puts everybody to sleep. And don't forget the heart, because the heart is really important. And in order to really make a connection, people need to understand that you're not an automaton. And I'm sure your friends and family don't see you that way, but it's easy to get stressed out and forget that. So one of the tricks that storytellers use, there's a lot of debate about this, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm using this as an example. There are people that believe that there are only 7 stories in the whole wide world. Just 7 basic plots, everything. And actually, we got the road up here because they're all a kind of journey. you know, on the quest, our heroine takes a journey in search of XYZ. And she just goes off searching and comes back. In Rags to Riches, you have humble beginnings, move on to happily ever after. It's still a journey. If you're going to vanquish the beast, the hero must destroy the evil monster. Then you've got the voyage and return home. That's when you return home and survive and you come back and there's no place like home. So you're like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. You know, comedies keep lovers apart before letting them come back together. Tragedies, evildoers get what's coming to them. And in Rebirth, it's a rough start and a change of heart and triumph at the end. So, you know, these basic ideas come up in every single story. So if you think of yourself as a storyteller and you imagine that everybody gets these things, because we've been hearing them since fairy tales and myths in families, you know, right through our lives in movies and TV, etc. If you think about how you're constructing your story, this can help you reach other people, because in the back of our heads, we all know this stuff. I mean, this isn't unusual, and so does everybody you're going to be talking to. So if you want to talk about, you know, what you can do, maybe you want to talk about a rebirth story. Maybe you want to talk about having a rough start and how you took on the challenge and made a change, or how you went out in search of, you know, something and came back and returned home and found value there. You know, there's a lot of ways, but you just need to know that these ideas, and you can Google 7 basic stories and they will come up, and you don't have to worry about, you know, writing them all down really fast. But it's a great thing to know if that's what you want to do, is tell a story, to know that you can rely on these ideas. So in terms of telling your brand storyteller, another important thing to do is think about metaphors. So again, I mentioned before, metaphors help us understand things that we don't know in terms of things we know. So it's easy to get stuck in this idea of telling a linear, chronological, detailed story about why you're good and how you could, you know, do this and that for the company and blah, blah, blah. And it starts to sound really boring. But if you start talking about how your performance, you're like a race car. You get out there and you power through and you are coming in ahead and you are winning for your team, for your company. Or maybe you're like a finely tuned violin. You're very sensitive to those details, like a scientist has to be very exacting in order to get the results and follow those methods. Not everybody can do that. I know I am not that person. I am not trying to be that exactly precise as in a lab. You know, I mean, I did it before, but that's not my thing. You know, maybe you're creative like a poet. Maybe you're creative like a handyman. Those are different types of creativity, but neither one of them is more or less valuable. You know, you can talk about hats you've worn in your career. That's really common. Are your contributions that you made in this or that job essential, like air and water, beans and rice, you know? Or do you come in and put the icing on the cake? You know, what is it? And when you use a little more colorful language, it helps people get a sense of who you are by the metaphors you choose, but it also keeps them awake while you're talking to them, and that's really to your benefit. So there's a lot of options. So think about your metaphors. Okay, so we're going to get to some brand storytelling in a minute and put you to work. But first we're going to talk about what happens in the next level, in Brand Storytelling 102. So you're thinking about a goal. You have a goal for your story. And you're thinking about developing supporting stories and telling stories that people can relate to. So you're going to use metaphors or even structure your whole story with a metaphor, like the journey, like the quest, like the rags to riches tale, you know, whatever you can structure. Maybe, you know, maybe you found that your life is a comedy and you went to school and did all the right things and left a powerful job because you found something that you loved a lot more and didn't get paid the same. I can think of a couple of people in my life who have found themselves in that position of just taking that leap into something unknown because that's where their heart was. That's what really mattered to them. And, you know, it was really hard and really scary, and they did it. But you can tell those stories too. And make sure you protect yourself if you're going to talk about painful stories. And this, at professional storytellers talk about this all the time, particularly around stories of loss. If someone, I mentioned my friend who's a nurse earlier, has lost a child, those stories are really good for her to tell now. But when she was going through all that, she couldn't talk about it without bursting into tears. I mean, so that was not an effective communication with strangers. I mean, you know, so you have to protect yourself and get to a different place with it. Get to a place where you're starting to see yourself come out on the other side. Don't feel like you have to just throw everything out there for people.
Yeah, this is going to be one of her hokey exercises.
Okay.
Wow. I think when they get too close. So anyway, just take a leap of faith and follow her.
All right, please draw a great big X on a piece of paper. Or imagine one if you're not using a pen and paper. Okay, in each section of the X, write down one element of your brand story that you think is important. It could be your expertise in a particular area, successes, it could be about relationships, that you're good as a supervisor, that you're good working in a team. You know, anything like that, qualities, challenges you've overcome, kind of things you probably thought about already when you were doing your resume. But pick 4 things and just put one in each part of the X. And then look at it, think about it, and feel free to add other related elements that come to your mind. So let's say in one part of this X for me, I would have to put education because I've taught in universities for 10 or more years. I spent half my life in school, or probably more, you know, and all of these things. And I do stuff like this tonight because I like to help people learn. It makes me happy. So it's selfish, you know, doing these sorts of things, but in a good way. And so, you know, education would be one of mine. Another one of mine would be knowledge management. Okay, that was the focus of my dissertation. I am a knowledge worker. I work with ideas and I work with people. And we build things like, we build websites together, Tracy and I do. We build brand stories for companies, but we don't, you know, build with, for work, we don't build with hammers and nails and things. So I would put knowledge management or knowledge work and education. I would also put small teams, because I love small teams. I love being able to get stuff done with a small group of people, and for us, it's us two and our various support people and our clients. Like all of us, we're a team. We are there and think of ourselves as in their corner. So those are some of the kinds of things I would think of, and then, you know, feel free to add other related elements. What you care about, what you're excited about. Any questions? Okay. Just take a couple of minutes and fill in your X. And you can talk about this too. You can always talk. And if you're feeling stuck, ask somebody for help. Or just tell them you want to talk about it. See what comes up for you external processors like me.
Brand stories very different depending on who the audience is. Like someone asked me about what I'm doing. Some people want to know what's the business, and then some people maybe are clients, and they wouldn't really want to say the whole business to the client. And so it's kind of interesting, this concise story, because it means a lot of people, and they want to know, like, in 30 seconds, what is it? It's like elevator pitch. So, yeah.
Okay, take one more minute and see if you have anything else you can add in your X. look at the 4 main things you identified. Maybe you have more, but pick the 4 main ones and connect them with a line. It could be a circle, it could be, you know, angles, it can be squiggly, doesn't matter. Connect those things with a line on your piece of paper. And then look at your line and look at the 4 things and what is the common thread that connects all of that together? It might be the chronology, it might be the emotion, it could be the plot, the characters, the metaphors. What connects? What's the connecting thread for all of these things that are essential to how you think about your brand? And just write it actually on the line. So let's say, I was talking about how mine would have education and knowledge work and small groups and small teams, right, thank you. And so my line, the thing that connects all of those for me is a passion for learning. That is what excites me. And when push comes to shove, that's what I care about helping other people do. So for me, my line, I would write on it, passion for learning, because that's something that's really important to my story. Questions, sir?
If your line is a circle, maybe it would be that one thing, but if you had a line between each element, could it be a different thing?
Yes. Make it work for you. But remember, you're looking for a thread, because one of the things when you're creating a story, you need to find something that weaves through all the pieces. So maybe it's not exactly the same, and maybe it's very different, but then somehow you have to connect those differences. And it's your story, so you can do it any way you want. Any other questions? Okay. So as you look at your diagram, it's important to remember that what's at the center, and you may find something else is at the center, it's not you. There's another piece of your story that's not the connecting thread, but something that's essential, that is in the middle. So for me, it would be, so you've got all my little line going around, and I've labeled it passion for learning. But at the center of that is the idea that learning is something I can do, and so is work, with people or independently. And that's really important, because I do not always like thinking like other people. I like to think in different ways to help me understand. You know, Tracy and I's brains work so differently. It is hilarious. We will look at the same thing and we will come up with entirely different perspectives on it. And that is great for our work, sometimes stressful on our relationship, but yet it's a powerful tool. So what I really find is at the center for me is that duality, or that both and of individuality and learning with other people and learning by myself. So you don't have to come up with what's at your center, but think about this and think about it in terms of the story you want to tell. All right, so you're starting to get a little bit closer, I hope, to having an idea of what kind of brand storyteller you want to be. So now comes the time to get intentional about the things that you need to include for other people. So you need to think about the core concepts for you, the topics that are going to matter to your audience. So whatever audience you picked in that exercise at the beginning, you're going to think about key important topics that are going to matter to them. And then we're going to start bringing the web into this a little bit. So you're going to start thinking about keywords, because search engines need keywords, and they work on keywords and topics. So you may or may not have a website or a blog, but if you've got a LinkedIn profile, you need to care about keywords and search, because any search on the web works the same way. The engines are running algorithms, searching through all the actual words you're using to figure out what it means on the page and to get an idea of you. It's the same thing when you put your resume into an employer's structured system, and they just run through and they're looking for keywords. So keywords are really important. You need to know the ones that you're aiming for that matter in your industry. And if you don't, you need to make a note to do some research to figure out what those are, because you move your chances up if you can get those in there, because often that'll get you the next step along the way. Then one of the things that comes with standpoint, and some of the comments earlier, is you need to get clear about your relationship to the story you're telling. That also connects to this idea that you don't want to tell something that's really raw. You want to tell something when you've moved on a little bit and you can have some perspective. So any story you tell, you're going to have a relationship to it. So even if you're telling stories to children and you think about fairy tales, some things will appeal to you more than others. That's why you tell them. When you're thinking about telling your own stories, you need to think about how you feel about that story that you're going to tell, because it's going to help you be a better teller. This is part of that thing that storytellers do that really help them figure out what's most important. Doug Lipman, who's a professional storyteller, talks about the MIT, the most important thing. That's about, if you understand your relationship to the story, you can figure out the most important thing in that story, and then you can tell it better. And that goes for a fable or for any kind of story for any kind of person. And you're also going to have to decide which stories to tell, when to tell them, and to who. So tonight, which story you're going to tell is going to depend on you, but you know who you're sitting around, you know you're going to be talking to the people that are next to you. So you can decide your level of trust and your level of revelation that you wish to aim for and figure that out.
I just want to say for those that are a little skeptical about what she's doing, one of the things that for me is I hate talking about myself. So once I constructed this story, then I could go out and promote myself, promote our business, and actually talk about my qualities and skills and what I can bring to the table. That was really important for me. And believe me, there was a lot of pain of me figuring out the story. I had a lot of back and forth and me fighting everything she wanted me to do. So, and because of that, I just want to tell you, I came up with this, actually she helped me come up with what I call one of my little stories, and I have it on the back of my business card because it's really important to what I do, and so I'm just going to read it to you. It says, you know how great it feels when you go to a website, find what you need, and enjoy the trip. That's what I do with WordPress. So that's one of my little stories, and this whole process helped me figure that out. So I just wanted so there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It's just, for me, it was a lot of pain because I hate talking about myself. So I don't know if other people are like that. But I'm kind of like, I'm good at what I do, you should just accept it. But that doesn't work. So.
And as much as that is true, you know what the other thing she constantly does that makes me insane? She tells me that, oh, I'm just really not that person. I'm not a designer. And yet she designs great looking stuff. And I'm just like, what is wrong with you? You do it well. I don't care if you're not technically a designer. And I really did have to fight that battle over and over again. I mean, you can't sell yourself short. You may not see yourself that way, but you have to look at the results. And sometimes you have to ask the people around you so they can remind you how good you are at things when you're busy forgetting. Because she forgot a lot. And I would remind her every time, because those are the things I appreciate. And I think that's really important. So, as you prepare to tell your story, you are going to pick a standpoint. You're going to tell a story in just a minute. So pick a standpoint for tonight that you're going to take as a storyteller. So perhaps it's as a job seeker, perhaps it's as someone hiring, perhaps it's as someone debating whether or not to start their own business. Who knows? You can pick whatever standpoint you like. And then I want you to write down your standpoint, write down your goal. Do you want to make a connection with somebody by telling this story? Do you want to impress them? Do you want to explain something? Do you want to inspire them? What do you want to do? What are you trying to accomplish? Who's your intended audience for this story? And I know you have your audience who's next to you, but perhaps you're working on a bigger story that you're going to want to tell to other people. So it could be different than the one we mentioned earlier, or it could be the same. And then I really want you to write down what do you want to get across, sort of the larger background idea that you're trying to communicate with the story you're going to tell. Okay, so this is just very quickly, take a couple of minutes and answer these questions and write all these things down.
Think about it.
Or think about them.
Or doodle them.
See, I write, she thinks, so you see how this works.
And I draw, so.
Any questions? Okay, and you can talk.
That's what I do with proposals. I want people to win. I do have a real passion for it. Okay, I always knew mine, but I never saw it written. What is it? To you. You go here? You attend here? I know I'm working
Okay, I'd like you to switch gears just a little bit, and this is the next part of the exercise to help you prepare to tell your story. Okay, so now I've got some other things up here for you to think about and add on to what you've been doing. Make sure you can identify these different parts that storytellers know before they tell, right? The characters, the plot, the challenge, the action, the resolution. And you may not address all of these because your story may not fit, but pick out the different components of a story that you can identify just so that you know what they are, because this is all part of starting to think of yourself as a brand storyteller and figure out what it takes for you to play that role. So carry on with what you were doing and make sure that you fill out these things as well, or something like them. And raise your hand if you have any questions.
That's where your passion is. I have a passion to help people find a job, but I do proposal writing and writing, so you gotta do what you gotta do. You might have to refer back to your project management, and there's a lot of research. Yeah, absolutely.
One was me personally, one was I
I was wondering if there was a relationship, because I can't tell the joke. But you feel like you're a good storyteller? No, I don't feel like that. But I think that storytelling is
All right, now, what I want to do, you all to do next, and you may have been talking to other people about your story, but now you've had a little bit of chance to think about one story you want to tell. So I want you to pick a partner, or if you need to, get in a group of 3. But you're going to do something that doesn't happen a lot in our very busy society. You're going to sit and listen to someone and say nothing while they talk to you. All you're going to do is pay attention. You're not going to think about anything to say because really you're not going to say anything back. You're just going to listen. So you're going to give your partner the experience of being really listened to. I mean, and pay attention, be there. Stop thinking about dinner or driving home or whatever else. You know, think about what they're saying to you so that you can hear them and they can be heard. And when you're telling, make sure that you tell your story kind of quickly. You don't get bogged down in details because details get overwhelming and it's really easy to get trapped there. So think about the different parts we've been talking about and quickly tell your story. If you have a group of 2, you can have 5 minutes or so. We're running a little late, so we just want to stay on track. So take a few minutes to tell your story. We'll ring the bell when it's time to switch, and if you're in groups of 3, you'll just have a little bit less time. All right, pick a partner and carry on.
Both of you are rhinos. It probably won't pick it up.
Where does that tape go?
It goes all over the world. Okay, well, I'll just...
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I'm just joking. You can record our stories. Well, I mean, you told your story. You want to tell it again?
Well, I'll go back very quickly to the beginning. When I was expecting my daughter, we didn't know that she was going to be sick, of course, to begin with. And then we were diagnosed with carrying a child who had trisomy 18. It's the presence of trisomy 18. It's the presence of a third 18th chromosome. Once a child is diagnosed with that, they say 85% of trisomy 18 pregnancies end in stillbirth or miscarriage. Of the 700 to 1,000 born alive each year, based on how many, you know, which year it is and everything else, 50% will survive childhood. 90% of those children born alive will not see their first birth. We were told to go ahead and do a D&C. And I said to the man, I said, excuse me, my daughter is still alive. This is when he told us she had trisomy 18. He said, and I quote, "If you know she's going to die anyway, does it really matter when?" And I said, "Oh, yes, it does." And we never went back to him. We carried her to term. Our water broke when they did the amnio and was completely healed. It happens in fewer than 10% of cases. We carried her to full term. She lived 7 days shy of 7 months. 7 people were saved at her service. And so that little tiny baby who didn't regain her 5-pound birth weight for 6 months had an incredible impact here on earth. When we were expecting her, my son was 3, and somebody looked at my son and said, "Are you going to be a big brother?" And he said, "Yes, I am." They said, "Are you going to have a little brother or a little sister?" And he said, "I'm going to have a little sister, and her name is Audrey Grace, and she's going to live with God." I had already told him that Audrey's body had too much information, and so her secret code had too much information, her body couldn't understand it, and so she wouldn't be able to stay with us long. But Audrey's body was going to stop living, but Audrey wouldn't, so Audrey would go to live with God. And through her life and through her story and through her struggles, and overcoming RSV and pneumonia and having her hypothalamus fail, that little tiny life impacted others, and that's something that I want to take the pain and the grief and the acceptance and move on to be able to impact others and to help others. So use Audrey as my inspiration.
I would say that I have a passion for winning. As a proposal expert and also as a career expert, as a proposal expert, I help companies win contracts. But as a career coach, I help people get jobs. So I have a passion for both. I've been doing it for over 20 years. So I guess my story would be, like I said, 20 years ago, I was always the one doing everybody's resume, even when I didn't know what I was doing. So I'm a professional resume writer now, and I do it as a consultant. I'm a professional proposal writer. I do that as a consultant. And I think through this exercise, what I really realize is that I have a passion for winning. And the winning is not for me, it's always for those that I serve. And I have a passion to help people reach their potential and always move forward, whether that's the customer that I'm serving or the person that I'm serving. I would say that's my passion.
So this is Coach J. That's right. That's the proper term. This is Coach J. Yes. Well, when I've always been the type of person from place to place in my life. I like to think I moved seasons. There was a spring season, there was a middle, and now there's an autumn season, there's a harvest. Well, it's like this. If my professional life was considered like a patchwork quilt, there are things that bind it together. It's got a back, it's got a face, right? That's where you see all the patches. It's got a face, it's got a core, it's got a back. In the core, my love for our Lord Jesus Christ. This is what ties this whole thing together. So wherever I go, and I live like a believer, wherever I put, that is the main focus, that wherever I am, whatever I do, I'm serving the cause of Christ. I'm bringing people to Christ, not in a way that I stand on the page. The preaching is with the word, with the word that I walk every day. The preaching is what I do here. I mean, it's like the kingdom first and everything else. It's proper place. The biggest thing in my life that I like to do is the support, nurturing. That's what Mrs. and I love. My two biggest things, Mrs. and Mom, especially Mom, because nurturing is the core. That's the whole second layer, nurturing people. The binding concerns my art. I love to see beauty in what I realize right now I'm volunteering as a beauty champion in my church.
So that asks for stories. That's good.
Oh, worship the Lord in the beauty.
All right, I hope you all had a good time swapping stories. And I want to shift gears very quickly, and I want you to hold on to that energy because we're going to come back to this in the discussion a little bit. But I want to zoom through this web stuff so we have a few minutes to talk as a big group. So if you plan to let your great big brand story loose on the web, that means you need content. You have content in your LinkedIn profile. You have content if you write a blog. You have content if you put up a video on YouTube as part of a video resume, or you do a slideshow presentation. You have content. That means you're what? You're a content creator. So now I'm telling you that you're a brand storyteller and you're a content creator. Please no head explosions. All right? Think about this stuff later. I know all this is a lot to grapple with, but I really hope you come back to it and give it some thought. So when you look at the content you create and share on the web, along with the interactions that you have, say in groups on LinkedIn, for example, all of these things influence the perception of your brand, and they feed your great big brand story. We like to feed ours cookies. So think about what you will do. Will you use social networks or social media? I know a lot of people raise their hands saying they were doing so now, but are there other sites besides LinkedIn that would be good for you? Take some baby steps, look around, see is there a niche site in your professional community that you might like to use. Or, for example, if you're really good at making presentations, think about putting up something on SlideShare that you can then connect to your LinkedIn account to show more, to expand your story and tell more about what you're doing. Maybe you want a website or a blog. WordPress.com is where we will tell you to go to create a blog. That's a great place. You can do it for cheap, and that gives you a lot more elbow room. Twitter is also fun for people that like short little things. I personally talk too much for Twitter, so I tend to like other longer form. So I blog, right? I write a blog. I'm writing a book. I do, whatever. I need a little more elbow room. So you figure out where you need to go. Who are your target audiences? Who do you want to reach? Where do you need to meet them on the web? Because they aren't going to come looking for you necessarily. You got to go out and meet them wherever they are. So as you're getting ready to go out and do that, look before you leave. Look at other people's profiles. Check them out. Read their status updates. Every network has a culture, so you want to make sure that you're observing the social networks you plan to use. And every social media site has sort of different levels of professionalism. There will be the shops that have 15 people to produce awesome professional content. You will not be competing with them, so don't try. Just let it go. You don't have to do that. Look at the people who are individuals who are producing the kinds of things that you want to produce, and think about doing content more like that. So make sure you set your expectations at a realistic level, because you will be out there with a lot of people who do very expensive stuff. But I can tell you that we had a slide presentation featured on the front page of SlideShare at one point, and we are not that shop that has 20 people doing stuff. So it was really exciting, but you can do it. You just have to get out there. Make sure that you consume content before you try to create it. Do not try to write a blog if you've never read a blog post. Read some blogs. I mean, come on. It makes perfect sense. It's easy. You want to watch videos if you want to create videos. You can make videos with somebody holding a cell phone and videoing you. You can do it with a webcam on your laptop. You don't need professional stuff necessarily, but do look at what other people are doing so that you know kind of, what the boundaries are out there. Remember that when you're a content creator, people will judge you. So what? People judge you all the time. Anyway, nobody's fallen over from it, so just carry on. If they like it, they'll pay attention. So you don't have to be, again, that great big shop. You can put your stuff out there. It's good. People that like it will pay attention. When you're embracing your role as a content creator, you're playing to your strengths. Do stuff that's good. I am not the person to put together a bunch of fantastically beautiful photographs and images, because that's not me. But I am the person that's going to write some stuff and try to help people think. She's the person that's going to do awesome things with images, like this presentation and the webinars we do and whatever, all that stuff. That's just her department, not mine. So play to your strengths. And when you share other people's content that you like, that you think is strong, make sure you add something of value. Try to say something about why you like it. Try to share it. Say if you're sharing it on Twitter or you're commenting on LinkedIn. I know it's really easy to click like. I'm guilty. I do that. Like, okay, great. But no, say why you like it. If you want somebody to notice you, look at what they're doing and give them some response. It doesn't have to be a critique. Everybody doesn't want critiques, but they want to be noticed. They want to be heard. You just had an exercise about being heard. It's the same principle on the web. People want people to pay attention and they want to be heard. So say something if you feel the urge. Remember, when you're trying to look good on the web, that everything you do reflects your brand. That means if you have a Facebook page that's public, anything that you think is private on the web probably won't be. It's not. Just put stuff out there that you're fine with everybody in the world seeing. I like to, when I was teaching, I used to tell my students, particularly when I was at Georgetown, when Facebook was very popular. Now it's less so with that age group, but when it was really popular, I told them, I said, do not put it on your Facebook page unless you have it on a billboard and be okay with your grandma driving by with you in the car. If that's not okay with you, do not put that on your Facebook page. So I know, I'm sure y'all aren't that group, but the same principle does apply. Think about your web presence as a whole, because people find your stuff in the weirdest ways, and from all over the world. It's crazy, but it also has enormous potential. So create your profiles on these sites like LinkedIn or Prezi or wherever, SlideShare. Create a profile to support your great big brand story and participate. And then give yourself a break and remember that your activity levels are going to ebb and flow. You're not going to just be all on like a fire hose all the time. Eventually you'll just run out. So, take your time, accept that your time and energy is limited. And, be careful with your professional web presence and your brand. It's just so different when you put things on the web and it's there forever and you're always held accountable for it. So make sure that you take a few minutes to think about that. As part of that, we like to talk a lot about setting boundaries for the social web. And one of the things now I want you to be a brand storyteller, a content creator, now I want you to set some boundaries, okay? Because it really gives you so much freedom. When you can say, all right, I'm going to talk about these sorts of things that are relevant to my career or my community or my extracurricular stuff that supports, who I am and the people that I care about. I'm going to talk about those things, and I'm going to do it in these particular places, and I'm going to do it in these particular ways. And when you figure that stuff out, you decide what you will and won't talk about, then it really frees you up to just do it. And that's the real hurdle I find with people on the social web when we do social media classes and things. People are just paralyzed at the idea of putting themselves out there and doing it. But if you make your own boundaries, you're in charge. Once again, this is another place where you have some control, then you can do it. And it's fine, and you will be comfortable with what you end up putting out there. So I encourage you to know your boundaries, and it takes a while to think about it, but it's worth it. SEO, search engine optimization, is a big, huge thing. I mentioned it a couple of times before, and I want you to know 3 things about SEO. And I do actually follow SEO for a living, and boy, believe me, there's a lot of stuff to know, but you don't need to know all of that nonsense. What you need to know is that when it comes to optimizing your content for search engines, it's just to help people find you. That's all you're doing. So search engines find you by the words you used. I mentioned keywords. So use those keywords, talk about topics that matter to you in your blog posts, in your tweets, in your descriptions, in your profiles. And then make sure that you, in addition to using keywords, you use language the way your audience will. How many people talk to their mobile phone when they want to do a search? I hate typing on my mobile phone. I talk to it because Google lets me, right? So I'm just like, oh, find me this and that. Like tonight, I read the address and Google told me where to go. It's great. I love this stuff. But natural language search is the future. It's not going away. So when you're writing or, whatever, particularly when you're writing profiles and things like that, use natural language because that will get picked up in search and your audiences can relate to it. And then always, always, always write about topics that they're going to search for and care about. If you're trying to build your brand as a writer, or create videos that people are going to want to see, if you're trying to build your reputation or build your brand and you want video to be a part of it, you know, just take all that with a grain of salt. So we have a new book coming out in later on this year, and it answers the question that people ask me everywhere I go. And they say, what am I going, I'll clean it up a little bit for tonight, what am I going to do about web content and strategy? Because it's complicated, and now, for us, it's been, you know, we got business owners, they're like, I'm running my business, I'm an expert in my stuff, and I do my own thing, and now you want me to write websites? And you want me to put up my own stuff and do all these things, and how am I going to set my boundaries on the social web? Well, we have something coming out to help people out with that. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code, or you can go to our website if you're not into the phone and the QR code thing. But, you know, it's kind of fun and techy, so we put it up there for you. But anyway, so that's something that's a little more in-depth. You can always go to our blog. We've got some articles. They've got an earlier stage of the boundary stuff on our blog. If you look up boundaries, there's a series of exercises and things to help you figure that stuff out, so you can do that. That's at chaos2clarity.com. And you can find lots of things that will help you out there along the way. So I'd like to open it up for questions. Oh, yeah, and Tracy wanted to say something, and Mal wanted to say something. And so, you know, it's about 9:30 something, 9:31 in 23 seconds. So I understand that we're coming to the end of our time. We're happy to stick around for a little bit if you all want to talk, and if you want to leave, I know everybody's got places to go. So we thank you for your attention.
Tracy, you want to jump in first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, first off, I know this is tough stuff for you guys, right? It's tough stuff for all of us when we really get into the whole thing of the brand stuff. We're hitting on you with that stuff every time you show up here on a Tuesday night, especially with things like elevator speech. And I wanted to come up during one of the exercises. I wanted to make sure that this aligned with our presenters' concepts tonight. So I want to tell you how this can connect to some of the other things you've heard at CNM. How many of you have heard the old story of working on your SAR stories?
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
Okay, anybody? SAR stands for Situation, Action, Results, and how I joke with you about how to turn that around?
RSAR.
RSA, right? Results, Situation, and Actions. Because in the newspaper world, if you do the results at the end, that's burying the lead. That's what the term is. So, you know, how can I save you $10 million when I'm an employee of your company? Tell me more. That's the result. So then you give the situation, the action, and how you might have done that in the past. The reason why I bring that up is, in a sense, that's almost a mini brand story, isn't it? Right? And think back to, so using some of the wisdom from the group tonight about doing an analogy, think back to the day, any of you ever take a literature class? What did you do when you took a literature class? You read the book, and then you would usually, if you didn't go out and buy the Cliff Notes, you actually read the book. If you read the book, what would the professor usually do? Say, well, let's talk about the hero of the story, or let's talk about the heroine. And you deconstruct sort of, who is that person that went through all those 100, 200, 300 pages that you read? What were they all about? What made them tick, right? So you write a little write-up about who the hero was, what the hero was all about, or the heroine was all about. And that would be your takeaway from, part of your takeaway from that book was, what was the hero's story, the heroine's story? Well, what does that sort of sound like? Isn't that a little bit of the brand story? Right? So one of the ways to connect this with some of our job search strategies is when you are putting your SAR stories together, when you're talking to your friends, when you're talking to your relatives, when you're saying, what makes me tick, and when you write your SAR stories, one way to come up with your brand is to look at what are the connecting dots of this person that had all of these different successes and results that are all these little mini brand stories, and then take that, rewrite that as the summary of who the hero or the heroine is, which is you, and then how do you then rephrase that when you're down in an interview and some topic comes up, person with those skills, with that brand, how would they then react in that work environment? So this approach of getting at your brand is probably the toughest thing to do, because how much do we really think deep inside about what we're all about? When these questions were wide open, and it was like, where do you start? We all froze. Like, where do we go from there? You gotta figure yourself out. And you can't trust that, you don't want to leave it to the prospective employer to do that for you. Because they won't take the time to do that. You gotta do that. So, thank you for getting us a little bit to stretch a little bit tonight and think about that stuff. So, Tracy, I know you wanted to say more, but I just want to jump in and connect that to some of the other trainings that we've had here tonight, so I hope that's helpful.
I actually forgot what I wanted to say.
I talked too long, I'm sorry.
No, I forgot long before you started. I will say, I will jump in and say something that she mentioned to me earlier while you all were doing exercises. You know, we talked about the great big brand story and the smaller brand story. And she talked about her experiences in IT, and certainly that drove a lot of how we started as working together. But what's behind all of that for her is a real belief that technology needs to work for people. It should not be a mystery. And so, I mean, from making things compliant for people with all different kinds of abilities to, good Lord, all sorts of things. You know, her focus is always on making it accessible. So that's one of the reasons that we do workshops and talks the way that we do, because it doesn't need to be a mystery. So anyway, that's part of her bigger story, and it's kind of behind there. And sometimes she talks about that, but most of the time she just doesn't. And I don't understand that, but that's her choice. And, you know, she talks about the other stuff up front. So that's just an example of how sometimes, you know, sometimes you talk about it and sometimes you don't. But if you didn't know that, and if she couldn't identify that, she'd be at a real loss when it comes particularly to talking to people you know, about a job or about doing work. If she leaves that out, that motivation, that driving force, it's a big loss, because that explains a lot.
I mean, because I do talk about how I'm what they call user focused, and so that speaks to a lot of people, because a lot of people feel like technology is kind of taken over their lives. And even when I talk to IT people, the fact that I'm I mean, it's a buzzword, I know, but the fact that I really have this entire history, and I learned to talk about it this way because of work I did with Joe, which I have to say was very painful. Not like I was left in tears, just the process, you know, having to really think about myself, so it's very difficult. You know, I learned to talk about that a while ago, so I actually have like a track record. So it's not like I'm picking up on the new buzzword, because I figured that out, who I am, that's who I am. Then I can go back into my work history, and I can say, oh, you know, I've always done this. I just didn't understand that's what I was doing. But it was only because I did the brand work with her, and believe me, she probably doesn't have bruises. I was really I was difficult. I just realized just when we were talking how difficult I was. But anyway, so I actually apologized to her.
I did. It was very difficult.
But that was really important, because I went back through, you know, my history, and I said, oh, I've always done this. I just never realized, because that was, you know, innate to me. That's how I worked. And I just didn't realize that I needed someone from the outside to say, hey, you know what? This is what you always do. So it's also important to think about, to do this work yourself, but it does help to have other people reflect back to you what they see.
You know, one of the, you know, when you think about kids, one of the things that parents do for children is reflect themselves back. So like you see yourself mirrored in people who are close to you. And that's really important. And without that, you know, as a species, we would not have evolved the same way. And that's back to that idea of communication being so important. So I would be really curious to know who in the room thought of something different tonight, something they liked, something they hated, something, what are you all taking away from this? Because I know this is just the beginning. This is like a little baby step that gives you an idea about how you can continue to develop yourself as a storyteller, as a content creator, or as someone who wants to use the web for work. So somebody tell me something about something. Please. Yes, sir.
I've always liked storytellers, you know, I've always liked stories where there's that moment where the storyteller is telling the story and you just lean forward and you're hooked. You know, it might be Garrison Keillor and he's experiencing a monologue. So what I thought is, okay, where's the point where my story hooks somebody? if they were just across the table, they'd be looking at me and they'd go, wow, okay, I can see them listening and processing. So that's something I gained.
Good, that's a great example. Yes, both jokes and fewer things. There's some good storytelling out there. Somebody else has a thought. Want to flee? Tell me something. Okay.
She'll take criticism too, anything.
I think it's having the portfolio of small stories allows you to maximize the best message and makes it most effective.
Good, thank you. That is a really important point. Yes.
There's an old saying that says that facts tell, but
There's an old saying that says that facts tell, but stories sell. And I think that when you're selling yourself, I think the stories help illustrate. And I mean, I've never written so quickly in all of my life tonight. You had some great notes and I think some great suggestions.
Thank you. That's important, I think, about the story selling, because it's not just about this sale, but it's about the power of the story. That's the engine that's driving all of that. And that is why it is so important for you all to step into that role and try to figure out how you can be a storyteller, even if you've never thought about yourself that way. And I am not a storyteller. I have lived for years with people who tell fascinating stories endlessly on, just one after the other. And I'm just, that's not me, but yet for work I find that this is something I really care about, is helping people tell their stories. So it's interesting. You don't have to be a natural storyteller to be a better brand storyteller and get your own self out there. Yes?
I have a question. What if some of your stories have to do with accomplishments and things my question is, what if some of your stories have to do with accomplishments and things you did in, quote, the analog world, and now we're sort of in the digital world, and by telling them, it makes you sound dated? Because, like, for example, I used to be in the newspaper business, and I wrote a lot of newspaper stories, and since that's really an industry that's very much in decline, if I were to talk about that, people would go, well, you're not savvy about new media, and you're not, up to date with that. So what is your response to those issues, analog versus digital kinds of storytelling? Or stories which emphasize analog versus digital skills?
I would say that you as a storyteller get to spin it the way you want. So when you tell me that you wrote for newspapers, what I see is that you know that the SAR story, the situation, action, results, is the upside down from the pyramid, from the inverted pyramid you use in journalism, right? Where you start with the lead and then you go down to the details. So you have immense amount of experience with getting to the point, and we have no time in this digital world to waste. So you've got to get to the point. So that is ingrained in you. You understand getting to the point, giving the reader what's valuable, and then filling in the extra stuff. So that's even more important on the social web when it comes to blogging and doing that kind of writing than it's ever been in newsprint. Because now, you may love the newspaper, and I have a friend who every day sits down and reads the Washington Post and spends like an hour reading the whole paper. And then I have other friends who get up in the morning and look around on the web and read, 20 different articles, skim through them really quickly from all these different places, and they have an entirely different experience. But what those two experiences share is the fact that people need to get to the point. And you got that. You get it. You know. And so I think that's a way, people really, there's nothing new under the sun. Yeah. The same things that have always mattered still matter, they just matter maybe a little differently. So by putting yourself in people's shoes now, you can say, hey, now you've got even less time. So this is even more valuable than it ever was. And you've also got all these other, competing millions of places where you can get information. So being able to edit yourself, which as a writer you have to do. It's really not just all up to the editor. You got to edit yourself, right? So you know how to do that. And that gives you a big leg up. So I think you just have to put it in the current context and focus on what it is that you do well. And it's not always easy to see that, but if you start by making a list of, what you did when you were doing that kind of writing, and then think about the new context and what people are dealing with now with information overload, with the massive amounts of formats that you can use now, it gives you a way to tie them together, and that's all people need. They just need you to tie them together for them, because they might not think of it. And so again, you can't leave it up to them to figure out. It's your job, to let them know. So I would say, it's a little work, but those skills are just as valuable. You just have to figure out how to talk about them. And then you can always start a blog. Then there's that. Or you can write a little paper, like a white paper, and you can put it up on your LinkedIn profile. You don't have to actually, commit to blogging, but there are things that you can do to show it as much as you can talk about it. But you can demonstrate that you understand that. And in fact, you could write a paper about the transition from analog to digital in news, because I bet you know a lot about that, and I bet you could put it in perspective for people like yourself who are thinking about that. So there's always a way you can take your own stuff and make it valuable to somebody else. So I think it's great. Thank you. Anybody else? Thoughts, questions, comments? Okay, so are you all going to think about yourselves as brand storytellers?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, show of hands. Yes? Oh, wow. Okay, my work here is done. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Good luck.
Thank you, Tracy and Dr. Jones. Great. Well, we will continue to work on your brand storytelling, whether you like it or not, because that's what's going to help you get your next job. So, on that note, thank you all for being here. It sounds like our presenters may be here for a few more minutes while they wrap up. So, if you have some other individual questions, if you want to come up, feel free to do so. And again, thank you all for being here. We'll see you next week. Work on your brand storytelling, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Ia to close us in prayer.
Shall we stand to honor God? Thank you, Father. We ask you at the beginning of this that you would help us, that you would open our minds and hearts to what you have prepared for us tonight. And you have prepared for us tonight wisdom in the form of your handmaid. And so we give you praise. As we promised, we give you thanks and we give you honor. Now please take care of us as we return to our several homes. Keep us safe until the time that we will meet again. And if we're so fortunate as to meet this way one more time, once again, we will give you praise. We love you and we honor you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.